Linda's raw emotions spilled out, her fears, her doubts, and her anguish over the baby. In a moment of vulnerability, they crossed a line, seeking comfort in each other's arm. They made a terrible mistake, one that would haunt them both. They consciously slept with each other. Afterwards, filled with regret, Alfred could no longer.
A lady of all men's dream, you be the one way.
Linda sat on the couch, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. It had been a very long day and she was ready for bed. Her husband John was in the kitchen, finishing his tea. The clock struck midnight and the house was silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. Suddenly, there was a loud crash. The front door burst open with a sudden violence, and 3 masked men stormed into the living room. Linda screamed, her voice piercing through the night as her heart pounded in her chest. John rushed in from the kitchen, but the intruders were too fast. Before he could react, they grabbed him and shoved him to the floor, pinning him down. "Don't move," one of the masked men shouted, waving his gun in the air. The metallic gleam of the weapon sent shivers down Linda's spine. She was paralyzed with fear, her body trembling uncontrollably. The leader of the group, taller and more imposing than the others, approached Linda, his dark eyes cold and merciless behind the mask. He grabbed her roughly by the arm and dragged her down onto the floor. She struggled, but his grip was too strong. His intentions far worse than she could have imagined. John, helpless and pinned down by the other 2 men, shouted, "Take whatever you want, don't just hurt my wife." His voice cracked with desperation, fear pulling in his eyes as he watched Linda being manhandled. The leader let out a chilling laughter, cruel and sharp. "Oh, we'll definitely take what we want, alright? But we want more," signaling to his men as he leaned over Linda, forcing himself on her countless times and taking advantage of her. Linda cried and very helpless at the moment. The nightmare lasted for what felt like an eternity. The minutes dragged on painfully, filled with terror and helplessness. And then, as suddenly as they had arrived, the men were gone, leaving Linda and John shattered, broken, and scared by the ordeal. Hey guys, returning subscribers, thank you so much for being here. If you're seeing my video for the first time, please take a moment and like this video. And consider subscribing to the channel as we unravel this question together. Will you consider keeping a child conceived out of rape, especially after being barren for over 15 years? Let's take you on Linda's journey and see how Linda handles her situation. Before that dreadful night, Linda and John had been married for 15 years. They loved each other so much, but they were sad because they didn't have children. They had always wanted children, but despite countless attempts, fertility treatments, and prayers, Linda remained barren. The strain it placed on their marriage was unbearable at the time, but they clung to each other, desperate for a miracle that never came. John in particular was consumed by the desire of a child. He longed to be a father, to hold his own son or daughter in his arms. But deep down, he carried a shameful secret. He had always known that the problem lay within him. He was the reason they couldn't have children, yet his pride wouldn't let him admit it to Linda. Instead, he masked his guilt with false reassurance, pretending to be strong while secretly drowning in despair. As months turned into years, John's frustration grew. He became withdrawn, distant, his desires for a family transforming into a dangerous obsession. It was this desperation that led him down a dark path, one that would change their lives forever. 2 weeks after the robbery, Linda felt strange. Her body was different. She visited the hospital for a checkup, expecting nothing, but what she learned shattered her. She was pregnant. The news was a shock, a terrifying reminder of that awful night. The child could only be the result of the assault she had endured at the hands of the masked men. Her heart sank and panic clawed at her. What should have been a joyous occasion now felt like a cruel twist of fate. When she told John, his reaction was immediate and brutal. "You can't keep this baby," he said, his voice laced with disgust. "It's a reminder of what happened to us. We need to move on from that night." His words were harsh, cold, devoid of compassion. Linda's heart broke. She didn't know what to do. John's anger confused her, made her question her own instinct. Part of her wanted to keep the baby, to see if it's a sign of hope, but John's harshness only deepened her uncertainty. His rage, however, was not what it seemed. It was a part of a darker, hidden plan. John's push for an abortion was no coincidence. He had a dark secret, one that he had buried deep within him. He had orchestrated this entire robbery, desperate to get Linda pregnant, but without her knowing the truth. For years, John had secretly blamed himself for their inability to conceive. When doctors confirmed his suspicion, his shame and desperation had driven him to a twisted conclusion. If he couldn't father a child, then he would have to find another way. That's when he turned to his old friend Alfred. Alfred was horrified when John suggested the plan. He tried to talk him out of it, to convince him there were other ways, but John's desperation had clouded his judgment. Together, they staged the robbery, bringing in strangers to carry out the unspeakable act. Despite John's instinct, Linda couldn't bring herself to terminate the pregnancy. She was tormented by sleepless nights, wrestling with her emotions and the trauma of what had happened. She sought solace in therapy, pouring out her fears to a counselor, desperate for guidance. Slowly, she found the strength to make a decision. She would keep the baby. When she finally revealed to John about her choices, his reaction was explosive. He stormed out of the house in a fit of rage, leaving Linda to sob quietly in their bedroom. But what Linda didn't know was that John's anger was all part of the plan. He needed to make it look convincing so that she wouldn't suspect his involvement. He kept pushing for her to have an abortion, hoping to cover his tracks. One afternoon, overwhelmed by guilt, Alfred met with Linda. He had always been a good listener, someone she could confide in when things with John became too overwhelming. As they talked, Linda's raw emotions spilled out, her fears, her doubt, and her anguish over the baby. In a moment of vulnerability, they crossed a line, seeking comfort in each other's arm. They made a terrible mistake, one that would haunt them both. They consciously slept with each other. Afterwards, filled with regret, Alfred could no longer hold on to the secret. He broke down and confessed everything. "Linda, I have something to say. The robbery," he whispered, his voice trembling. "It wasn't random. John planned it. He wanted you to get pregnant. I'm so sorry, Linda." Linda stared at him, her world crumbling around her. The man she had trusted, loved for 15 years, had betrayed her in the most unforgivable way. Her heart shattered into a million pieces. And what's worse, he is making her feel so bad about it. When Linda confronted John, her voice trembled with fury and pain. "How could you do this to me?" she screamed. "You betrayed me in the worst way possible. You manipulated my life, my body, for your selfish desires." John stood before her, shame written all over his face. He tried to defend himself, stammering excuses about how he thought it was the only way to have a family. But Linda was beyond listening. She couldn't believe the man she had loved would go to such lengths to deceive her. "You had no right," she said, her voice filled with anguish. "You took away my choices. You ruined everything, John. How could you? And worst of it, you're making me feel like a trash." But in the midst of it all, Linda still had a little faith in John. Maybe Alfred was just being jealous, and John was innocent after all. John wasn't saying anything. Months later, Linda was shopping at the supermarket. Her belly was noticeably round, a testament to the new life growing inside her. She reached for a can of tin tomatoes when she accidentally bumped into a man. She didn't recognize him, but the man knew her immediately. His eyes widened as he put one and one together, realizing that the pregnant woman in front of him was the same one he had wronged that terrible night. Guilt washed over him like a wave. He had known he was contacted to rob and take advantage of a woman, but he hadn't known pregnancy would be part of it. Now, seeing Linda with her belly, he felt the weight of his actions even more. Desperate to make amends, he approached Linda with a heavy heart. "Excuse me, ma," he said, his voice thick with remorse. "I know I don't deserve it, but I want you to know that I'm truly sorry for what I did to you that night." Linda froze, recognizing him immediately. Her heart pounded in her chest. As she processed his words, she couldn't believe he had the audacity to approach her. But there was something different in his demeanor. He seemed genuinely remorse. Linda listened, her heart heavy with emotions. The pain of that night had been immense, but hearing the man's remorse offered a silver of closure. "You caused me so much pain," Linda said softly, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and sadness. "But I believe in second chances. I hope you find a way to make things right in your life." The man nodded, tears welling in his eyes. "I promise I will," he said. "But there is something else you need to know, ma. It wasn't just me. Your husband planned the whole thing. He wanted you to get pregnant. I think, seeing this now, and he used me to do it. Meanwhile, I have no idea pregnancy was part of the plan. He wanted me to just sleep with you." Linda's eyes widened in shock as the robber's word sank in. She realized Alfred wasn't lying after all. When she got home, her face contorted with a mix of betrayal and fury. "John, is this true? John, did you really plan this? You know, Alfred told me this, but I was still believing in you, still hoping this were all a lie." John's face paled. He stammered, trying to find the right words. "Linda, I just wanted a child. I thought it was the only way." Linda's anger boiled over. "How could you?" she screamed. "You betrayed me in the worst possible way, John. You made me feel guilty for keeping the baby when it was all your plan. How could you do this to me?" John hung his head, unable to meet her eyes. "I'm sorry, Linda. I was desperate. I didn't know what else to do." Despite the betrayal, Linda found strength within herself. She decided to focus on her pregnancy and her own healing. She sought support from friends and family, and slowly she began to rebuild her life. She gave birth to a healthy baby boy and named him David, a symbol of strength and resilience. Holding him in her arms, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in a long time. John, filled with mix of joy and regret, vowed to be the best father he could be. He knew he had a long way to go to earn Linda's forgiveness, but he was determined to make amends. He sought therapy and worked on becoming a better person. He realized the gravity of his actions and was willing to do whatever it took to make things right. John faced severe consequences for his actions. Linda decided to separate from him, needing time and space to heal. John respected her decision, understanding that his betrayal had deeply hurt her. He moved out of their home and continued his therapy, working on his issues and learning how to be a better person. The community was shocked when the truth came out. John faced public shaming and lost many friends, but he accepted it as part of his penalty. He knew he had to rebuild his life from scratch and prove to everyone, especially Linda, that he had truly changed. The robber too sought redemption. He turned himself into police and confessed his crime. He faced legal consequences, but his genuine remorse and effort to make amends were recognized. He participated in community service and dedicated his time to helping others, trying to atone for his past mistake. Linda's strength and resilience shone through. She focused on raising David and providing him with a loving and supportive environment. She continued to work on her own healing and sought counseling to deal with the trauma she had endured. Linda has become an advocate for women who had experienced similar situations. She shared her story, hoping to inspire others to find their own strength and resilience. Her journey became a beacon of hope for many, showing that it was possible to overcome even the darkest of times. Years later, as Linda watched David grow into a kind and compassionate young man, she reflected on her journey. She had faced unimaginable challenges, but had emerged stronger and more united. She had learned the importance of trust, communication, and unconditional love. John too had changed. He had learned the power of forgiveness, resilience, and love. He had worked hard to rebuild his life and earn Linda's forgiveness. Though their marriage was scarred, it wasn't beyond repair. They had been through the darkest moment together, but they had come out stronger. John found his way back to Linda, but it took time and patience. He learned to approach her with humility and a genuine desire to change. Every day, he tried to earn back her trust in small, deliberate ways, through his actions rather than just empty words. He took on the role of a father with sincerity and devotion, becoming the partner Linda had always wanted. Their conversation became deeper as they addressed the roots of John's fear of inadequacy. He confessed to Linda that the desire for a child has consumed him to the point where he lost sight of everything else. He had never truly believed she could love him without children, a notion that Linda vehemently opposed. "I married you for you, not for what you could give me," Linda told him one night as they sat in the living room, David asleep in his crib. "I would have chosen you, child or no child." John's eyes filled with regret. "I didn't realize that. I was so scared of being a failure." "You never needed to prove anything to me," Linda said softly. "I wish you had trusted me enough to let me in. We could have gone through it together." It was a turning point for them. For the first time in months, they held each other, not in anger or distance, but in mutual understanding. Years later, as David grew into a joyful, compassionate boy, Linda and John sat together on their couch, watching him play. Their relationship had survived the unthinkable, and though it was marked by scars, it had grown stronger with time. John glanced at Linda, his heart filled with a mix of gratitude and remorse. "Do you think we made the right choice?" he asked, his voice quiet. Linda didn't hesitate. "Yes," she said firmly. "David is a gift, regardless of how he came. He saved me in more ways than I can explain. Keeping him was the best decision I have ever made." John nodded, though he still wrestled with his own guilt. "I'm sorry for everything." Linda squeezed his hand. "We've been through so much, John. We've both changed. What matters now is that we've made it here together." As they watched David laugh and chase after butterflies, a sense of peace settled over them. They had faced unimaginable pain, but they had also found hope and forgiveness. The lingering question of what they would have done differently remained, but neither of them wanted to dwell on the past. Instead, they looked forward towards a future built on love, resilience, and the strength they had found within themselves. Linda and John's story is one of pain, betrayal, and ultimately redemption. It asks a difficult question. Would you keep a child born out of such a traumatic event after years of barrenness? Would you be able to forgive such a betrayal? These are questions that challenge our understanding of love, sacrifice, and the incredible resilience of the human spirit. Thank you so much for watching. And please don't forget to share this story with your family and your friends who might love to see them. Till I see you again in my next story. Goodbye.